All right. Hi, everybody. This is the production readiness review meeting for starting the 133 release cycle. Yay. So I'll kick off today. Looks like we've got a couple of new folks. Well, Matt was here last cycle, but Bridget, thank you for joining. Let me pull up the agenda. So the main thing I wanted to do here is we got confirmation from a bunch of shadows. Sorry, I'll display the agenda once I figure out how to do that. Okay, so sorry. Here we go. So today, the proposed schedule, I was just looking at it just before the meeting. This seems kind of silly to me to then have 5 weeks between code freeze and anyway, we'll address this with the release team. I think we went through this a couple cycles ago where the actual time between enhancements freeze and code freeze seems to be getting squeezed. So I hope to fix that. But honestly, for this team, the most important thing is the enhancements freeze date. So we have about 5 weeks between now and enhancements freeze, and that's when most of our work will happen. I see. Oh, go ahead, Matcha.
I actually checked how we had it in the past 2 or 3 releases. There were 4 weeks between. I believe that someone counted the dates wrongly because it usually was week 5 and week 9. But the diff between the release 1 year ago, the previous release was always that there was like 4 weeks. Currently,
Actually,
as you said, it's
did
3.
this analysis because I was peeved a release or two ago, and I was.
I remember that spreadsheet that you had last time where we had it. I
I
don't
haven't
remember
updated it for
the post.
132, but I'll take another look at that and raise that with the release team and see if we can shift some times around. Because, actually, from my point of view, it's not as urgent this release because the stuff we're doing, the caps that I'm working on, like, are pretty well along, even in implementation, right? So I think I'll be fine, but I know that it's just going to put a lot of stress on other people. I would rather that we try to keep it, give up people a little more space. So anyway, I'll put that in here just for now. I'll put it since the chat doesn't. So in any case, I don't know that, like, our typical pattern here for Bridget and Matt. Matt sat through this last time. Right, what we do is, there's a board, and I don't think it's been set up yet because the release hasn't officially started yet. It starts next week. But once we have the board, we will give you access to the board, and the ideal process is that as caps start to reach a state of being ready to be reviewed for production readiness, the shadows will come in and do a review. But since you're new to it, we also can do, we've done in the past, live kind of co-shadowing. I think that worked pretty well. A couple of cycles ago, we did that with folks. So happy to do that too with you, Bridget, or you, Matt, or any other shadows who are listening to this recording later. But the idea is to validate the answers to the production readiness questions. And you generally are going to have to review the whole KEP to some extent and understand the design. And you should be on the lookout for things that aren't part of the question section, but are parts of the design that might cause, supportability or maintainability or any other issues. Um, uh, but we try to draw that out in the answers to the questions. And then, so on the board, it lists all the caps. You kind of can claim them as a shadow. And then we have a little notes column on that board. And what I usually do is I'll just put in like, if I'm reviewing it on, February 1st, I'll just hit 2-1 and I'll just put my name and the current status. This just helps us because we tend to have to revisit the same caps over and over, sometimes 5, 6, 7 times, and kind of like review and respond to comments. And so, at least for me, it helps me know that you've seen it as a shadow. And then the approvers can come in after at least one shadow review, typically, although, depending on what things, some things get picked up by shadows and some don't. So it depends how many we have. And the load balancing, we just do it manually. I mean, we just sort of like, if I'm overloaded, I'll ask another approver to pick it up and vice versa. We try to stick with ones we did in the past because, of course, we see them as they advance through their stages. It's much easier to review one when you already have all the context, even if you have to swap it back into memory. Like it's much easier. But we do, when people are on vacation or whatever, we do what we do and we take over people's. Any other comments from any of the other approvers on how the process goes? Typically, like vast majority of the activities in the last week. But the last 2 weeks we start to get stuff, but you know how people are. They don't get done. And I mean, it's just human. We don't get done till we're near the deadline.
I think that's a great summary. And in those last 2 weeks, don't be shy on Slack. Would probably be some advice I would have.
Yes.
If your name is listed as a shadow, I will probably ping you and ask, have you gotten to it? When are you going to get to it? And that's just so that we make sure we have time. If you see one that I've forgotten, please do the same. Because a lot of times these will get added, and if you've planned your week, you can just forget.
Yeah, and they're technically we don't guarantee that we'll get to it if they add it in the last week, but I don't think we've ever actually slipped somebody. As long as they actually get it done, we usually get it done, get the review done. But it's just a little self-protection there to have that week of like, hey, you got to get this done a week ahead of time, or we can't guarantee we'll get to it. Just because the team's fairly small, but actually it's growing now, so hey, maybe we'll be able to relax that at some point. The last 2 weeks before enhancements freeze. Once enhancements freeze happens, we have almost nothing to do on this team. Unless there's like something that gets reopened or there's what do you call them, exceptions. The PRR approval happens on the cap, not on the code. So there is an expectation that what's declared in the cap will be followed through with in the code. And usually when it comes down to like going to the next stage, we'll ask those questions again because we get to review it again, and we'll say, hey, you said here in beta you were going to implement this metric, is it there? And we'll kind of poke people those things, and all that. But we trust our developers and our SIG leads and our code reviewers. So it's more we're just trying to help people think of the problem, think of things they haven't thought of. I mean, that's the main goal, is like think through these problems that could happen, make sure that this point of view of the way I try to think about it, because I have to put myself in that headspace too, is if I have 10,000 or 100,000 clusters that I have to manage, can I do it effectively? Right. That's why we're so big on metrics, right? Like so down on run this script against every cluster, right? So that's kind of the philosophy. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Bridget, January 30th, really, I'll be honest with you, the very busiest time is just the last few days. Like, I mean, the last few days, it's like many hours, and sometimes I at least will, go late to make sure that because of all the time zones and try to keep, the machine churning out, caps. So I tend to block out a lot of time in that last few days, the last week for sure, um, to put in extra hours to kind of like make it happen. But you should be on it before that. It's not going to like demand tons of your time because you'll review something and then it'll be 2 days before somebody replies. Is that everybody else's experience as well?
It is.
Yep.
And then in that last week, I also reserved time to actually start nagging people on Slack of,
Yes.
hey, you're missing this, and making sure that they see it, because I don't want them to miss just due to a lack of awareness.
Yeah, it's the same that I wanted to mention. I'm doing the same, especially for things that are close and are missing like 1-2 things. Like if something is missing, like I have like 15 open comments, I ignore that. But like if there's 1 or 2 minor things, I do the same. And I think like regarding my experience, I think there are 2 groups of people. Like the first group is those few things or few PR or few caps that are already ready for review. Like I just approved 2 earlier today. And there's like huge majority that is exactly ready, like just on deadline.
Yeah. And they'll there are some people who get confused and they think that the PRR freeze means they have to have it like done, when really it's just that it has to be like approved, but it just has to be filled out every single cycle. I have to send out that email. So you've probably seen it. So it's one reason I kind of hope to get rid of the PRR freeze if our team gets big enough, but it's kind of a stupid minor thing. So
So,
that's
quick
it.
question about the PRR freeze then. It sounds like the PRR freeze, from what was just described, someone might come in and think, okay, cool. People want me to have everything in February 6th. So, therefore, I would expect someone's going to start nagging me February 6th. And then if I don't finish following up on everything I just got nagged about by February 13th, I'm out.
That's basically it. Yeah.
That's the interpretation, but you just said you would get rid of the February 6th checkpoint of
We
start
don't need
bugging people. So I'm curious, why would that be valuable to change? Because that sounds good. Like
mostly
having a date where we say, hey,
it is. It's
you're
just
about
that
to be
there's
late.
like right. It's just that there's also API review. There's also like every review where we kind of put ourselves special because we had just a couple of people and we were like had so many caps to review. API review is the same way. It's even worse for them. But I'm not going to change anything at this point. I'm just saying it annoys me to get that question every single cycle. It's a very minor point. So, but you're right. Your interpretation is exactly right. We kind of like expect to start nagging people or being able to do significant number of reviews starting at that date. In reality, it's not as impactful as one would hope, that deadline. But anyway, any other questions? Because otherwise we can wrap it up. Like, as we get closer, maybe once the board's available, we can communicate on Slack. That's what we mostly do. And we'll just say, hey, these are available. Shadows can pick them up. Some of them might be ready to do. If anybody wants to do a live review with me and see how I go through it, I'm happy to do that. Just reach out to me and we'll schedule it on our, on our own schedules, based on our own schedules. Awesome. Any other questions?
Mostly, I just want to make sure that at some point when we start being able to raise our hand and claim them, I want to make sure that I, for example, don't accidentally claim 98% of them, or someone else claim like 78%, and then the other 2 new people are like, wait, what? And so
So
I
what
just
I
want to that's why I asked about load balancing. I was like, is there a certain percentage we're expected
Man.
to do, or like how does that work?
Plan on there being about 60 or 70 of these. So if you're doing an initial partition, yeah, that'll help you divide that number.
Yeah, it looks like based on who's confirmed right now, you know, about 10 to 12 per shadow makes sense. But yeah, so just expect that. And I wouldn't worry too much about it. One of the things though you might want to do, like on the path towards becoming an approver, what you need to do is you need to be sure you're not focusing just on like the SIGs you're most familiar with, because you're going to have to approve things across the entire project. So try to get a spread of things across different SIGs. Try to get a spread of things that are alpha reviews, beta reviews, GA reviews. On the one hand, alpha has lower bar, right? There's not that much you have to have. But on the other hand, like it's where most of the sort of design level, like what you're doing is completely unscalable or what you're doing is completely unsupportable type of direction can come in. Beta is probably the most that's where we start. That's where the requirements ramp way up, because we're no longer like alpha is basically you can turn it off, and if you turn it off and then you turn it back on, stuff doesn't break, right? But beta, we start to, I believe, ask for the metrics and things like that. It's all in the
Yeah.
questionnaire, which things are required where. That's when
Yeah.
we ramp up the requirements a lot more. And then, you know, the stable
Oh,
ones tend
yes.
to be pretty easy.
I remember being on the filling it out side of this and
Yeah.
working with you for IPv6
Oh yeah, and it's fun.
for
Yeah.
dual stack. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Then let's get to it. We'll communicate on Slack. If there's any other questions, reach out there. Thanks, everyone. Get your 40 minutes back.
Thanks, folks.
Bye-bye.